And so instead of going into to title and everything else that Arshia did, I will just say this is somebody who has been an advisor, has been a mentor to so many of us, somebody who has done some incredible work across industries, somebody who is from afar and from up close shaping how nonprofits think and work here in India, somebody who is thinking about workforce trends and so many other things, and also somebody who has basically been really advising the circle and so much of what we do here, officially and informally, pretty much since before we got started. And so just a lot of gratitude for you being here with us, Ramesh, and for all that you do, and all that you are. And I think underlying all of that is just the incredible human being that you are. And so thank you for this, Ramesh, and thank you for spending the time with us today. We're excited to have you, and we're excited to jump in. The topic that we're about to hand over to you on is a topic that I think who could not be more pertinent and could not be more relevant, right? We are all witnessing what feels like massive workforce transformation, right? And articles have been written on this. People are talking about it. We are seeing it and we are feeling it, right? Every single day. It's almost like we are watching the workforce around us evolve in ways that feel rapid and that feel sudden. And yet when we step back and we look at statistics, they're telling us that this is a real transformation that is here to stay. And yet at the same time, when we look inside of our schools, it too often feels like they're static. And so it feels like we're watching these two different worlds, right? This one rapid transformation and this one that continues to stay static. And so what we're excited to hold space with you on is, what are you all learning from the vantage point that you have and the research that you have all pulled together? And I know McKinsey has been really at the center of a lot of this research over time on how do you actually think about how the workforce is changing. And what we'd love to do is to hear from you on some of that. And then we're going to engage in some wider conversation with the audience here. What does that mean for schools, right? And when we think about the changes, what does that tell us? And how do we hold space for some of these changes overall? So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand this over to you, Ramesh, to take us through what you all are learning, and we'll just build from there.
Thank you, Sandeep, for that warm introduction. Really appreciate it. You're very kind as always. I have been so inspired by you and the team at Circle in what you're trying to do, and in both think and do things to really reimagine education. I'm very, very excited for what the future holds. I'm also extremely inspired by this group of people who have assembled. Some people that I've known for a long period of time, including Meher and Anu that I see here, and many other people who are more recent friends, and some new people that I don't know as well. So really look forward to this intimate conversation with all of you, and hopefully continue to contribute to the dialogue around this topic. The purpose of my remarks over the next 10-15 minutes is to share a little bit about what is changing in the future of work, how are individuals and firms responding to this, and what does it mean for education systems. That's really what I'll touch on, and then really open it up for a discussion with this group. I will be borrowing on research done by the McKinsey Global Institute, a lot of which we have published, and you can even send a link out there on the future of work and what MGI has published. And we've also been publishing a lot from our education practice on reimagining education in the world, some of which we have published and some we will be publishing towards the end of this year. So very excited to share all of those with all of you. We actually see 6 disruptions that are becoming more and more important in the world today. Obviously, more and more geopolitical conflict, whether it's Ukraine or even beyond that, leading to some pretty tough challenges around food security, economic development in the world. We see increasing challenges of inequity, vulnerable populations that are affected even more by COVID and the world coming out of COVID. The challenges caused by energy transition in the world. Of course, the continuing disruption of technology, and we'll talk a bit about that, both the opportunities and challenges that it creates. And if there's one theme that we've been seeing is just volatility, increasing volatility, which has become a feature of what we are seeing in the world today. So all of this, to the point that you were making in the beginning, Sandeep, the expectations of the future vary quite a bit, and the scenarios that we see for the future in terms of the depth and duration of the economic slowdown in the world varies quite a bit, with huge implications for employment and what the workforce needs to be ready for in the future. What does this mean for the nature of labor force and the kind of skills required in the future? Some massive trends, but if there are two that I want to highlight, it's really around the importance of technology and the importance of being technologically literate and the workforce being able to deal with the technology shifts in the world in the future, and the increasing need for socio-emotional skills. You know, people use very different words to describe it. I know Brookings has been doing a lot of research. Many other organizations have been thinking about and doing work around what are 21st century skills that are going to become more important in the world. But I really wanted to highlight the importance of compassion, communication, interpersonal relationships, being able to hold multiple perspectives have all become much more important. So this combining need for deeper and deeper technology skills, often people say, needs more left brain capabilities. With this need for socio-emotional skills and being ready for the 21st century, I often say that these soft skills are the harder skills, makes it quite a challenging world that the labor force is coming into. And we're seeing that women have actually taken even longer to come back into the labor market. We see this in the US, but we see this in many markets around the world and we've been publishing a lot of research on it, that then is making it quite hard post-COVID for the workforce to come back and return and have a fruitful, meaningful engagement in the world. Individuals who have pursued bold mobility in this context and really invested in their own skill development, and again, we can talk about it more in the Q&A, have actually are able to show much more longer term lifetime earnings. As MGI, we've done research in 4 different countries in the world, in the US, in Germany, in India, to really look at what have individuals done to be able to sustain a lifetime of learnings. And some of the themes is really around career development, being able to shift careers is what then leads to sustain long-term earnings in this dynamic, volatile world. Firms have been responding to this in many ways, continuing to invest in mobility of their labor force, continuing to invest in skill development, career development of the labor force, and investing in building technological capabilities of their own workforce. We at McKinsey are evolving our own recruiting as well. Today, and as we look at the next 5-10 years, every project manager that we have in our workforce probably has to be much more literate in technology, using Python and R, and being able to process data and be much more analytically solid than what they were 5 years ago, and being much more literate on socio-emotional skills, being able to work with larger and larger teams with much greater cultural diversity that we expect in our own workforce. And that's what we are both recruiting for and investing in our own people as we move forward. We are seeing with the Gen Z workforce, for people, that there is actually greater attrition. People are also trying to continue to search for what is the best career, best job for them. And in part, Gen Z is looking for greater career development, greater meaning and fulfillment in work that they're looking for. Again, maybe a theme we can come back to in the Q&A, as they look for, and greater flexibility in a post-COVID environment, as they look for their own best employer, best job of choice. We see greater attrition post-COVID, and hopefully, things will settle down in this new economic environment. The last point I'll touch on, and then open it up for questions, is how have education systems reacted to this, and what do we see in the successful education systems that have responded to this? Sort of two big themes: recommitting to what we know works well in education systems, and reimagining a better future in light of all the shifts that I just touched on. So on instruction and pedagogy itself, really recommitting to core skills and learning outcomes that people have always known work, but at the same time using technology for improving access to education, really bringing in much more holistic support and holistic vision for what education is needed in the world, and reinforcing the kind of skills I've been touching on, both on the technology side as well as on the socio-emotional side. An even greater emphasis and investment in teachers and educators and leadership, both setting high quality standards for what they want to see in the classroom, but also investing in professional development that actually works in the system, unbundling the roles of teachers, and much greater, reimagining the kinds of teachers that you see in the world, and a greater flexibility, greater variation in career paths for teachers and leaders in the education systems. A variety of reinvention in systems and structures. You see new school structures opening up. Hopefully, the circle will help people reimagine these schooling systems that we're beginning to see in the world. And lastly, much greater investment in socio-economic constructs. In the core, we are seeing a commitment to kind of what I would call fit for context education systems, but then at least at the edge, we're seeing more resource allocation in areas which need investments. Again, a sensitive topic in many geographies around the world, but we see greater resource allocation to geographies and children who need the investment to be able to deal with the new socio-economic environment that we're talking about. I'll just pause there. I've touched on a lot of ground. Overall, I remain optimistic. I think the investments we see, I'm hopeful, will help students not just recover from the learning loss created by the pandemic, but hopefully leapfrog into what's possible in the future. Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Ramesh. And a lot of intriguing potential shifts, and I love the fact that you're saying optimistic about it, but a lot of potentially also startling potential shifts as well, right? Like, I'm going to dig into a couple of questions, and I'm going to try to pull some of these questions from what we're hearing from some of the audience here beforehand. And then I'm going to open it up for additional questions that emerge as well, right? So, I mean, one question, Ramesh, is, look, I know that McKinsey's published a lot on the role of automation, right? And how that's actually going to play into the future of the workforce. And when you look here in India, some might argue that actually, given where the labor market is, and given particularly our oversupply of labor, that we don't need to worry about that for a while, right? That actually, like, it's going to be a human intensive operation for a very long time. Would love to know your thoughts, and where do you see India going, and how would you respond to that? Because there are implications of that for what do we actually need to prepare graduates for.
Yeah, firstly, I'm optimistic about the potential for India. I'm just this week we had our managing partner of McKinsey, Bob Sternfels, in India, who talked about not just the next decade being about India, but the next century offering massive potential for India. And I see that in sector after sector, in healthcare, which I understand a little bit better, but technology services, industrial companies, many sectors where I see massive opportunity for India. And for India to be relevant in the world, I don't think our workforce can ignore the impact of technology. So yes, Sandeep, it's going to be labor intensive given the supply situation in India. At the same time, I think for the workforce to be globally relevant in these sectors where you're going to see economic growth in India, I think the workforce will need to be technologically adapt. I think automation will change both the core work in these sectors, but also a lot of the enabling functions, whether you see work in HR, in finance, or in any function in an enterprise, I think technology will have a massive impact. And for Indians and employees in India, whether they're working for Indian companies or working for global companies, to have a meaningful role to play and be productive contributors to society, they will need to know how to use this technology. Whether I touched on coding skills in the beginning, they will need to know how to use technology to make a meaningful difference in whatever roles that they play, whether it's in the private sector, in the social sector, even in the government. I think technology will have a big impact on what I see in digital health, for example, where with India playing taking a pretty prominent role. I do think the labor force will need to understand the impact of automation. Will need to be adept at being using technology for the benefit of the world and for themselves in the world.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Ramesh. And I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. I'm gonna jump around a little bit, so bear with me. Another Gallup just released a survey a while back saying, right, that 70% of millennials and Gen Z people want purpose as the single biggest thing that they want from work, right? Let me say that again. Purpose was rated as the single biggest thing by 70% of millennials and Gen Z that they want from their employer. What do you think that means for how organizations need to shift and even schools need to shift?
This is a big question and a big topic, Sandeep. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface on what it really means and how to turn it from just a concept into actions that both individuals need to take and firms need to take, and society needs to create an enabling environment. At least, I go back to Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, one of the most powerful books I've read and something that shaped my own thinking. I think for me, when I think about purpose, I often think about the key things that have shaped my life and how that's led me to think about what gives me energy, what gives me meaning. This concept of ikigai that you and I have talked about in the past. And I often then think about how does that get manifested in what I do in my day-to-day work, both at McKinsey where I work, but also in all my work in the nonprofit organizations I work with, in my day-to-day life as a human being and leader. And so I think what firms need to do is to help individuals reflect on what gives them meaning, what gives them energy, and how they can bring that to life every day, so that it has meaning for them. In our research as McKinsey, we found that employees, there are 5 sources of meaning typically for any person. It can come from the investment they make in themselves, a deeper sense, which is what I touched on. It can mean, what the energy they get in the team that they're working with. It can mean from, it can be a source of meaning they get from the customers or the clients that they're interacting with. It can be the company and the contribution they're creating, or the institution that they're building together, or it can come from the contribution they're making to society at large. Thinking about what is the source of meaning for that particular individual, how is that getting expressed in the day-to-day work, and how firms can then unleash the full power of that, I think is quite important. And having both a communication system, but also a learning and development system that allows individuals to understand what gives them meaning and being able to express that, I think is quite important. I think the implications for schools are quite profound, Sandeep. I think Ken Robinson talks about this, which is the purpose of education is to help individuals understand more deeply what gives them meaning, find that in the causes that they do, and then help them find institutions where they can express that. And I don't think education systems today invest nearly as much in in helping individuals find that purpose. Often they can, at least in the Indian context, I found that often education systems can become more means for screening of individuals versus really helping every individual find that meaning in themselves. So when I walk, a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to walk into classrooms led by Teach for India fellows. I also had a chance to visit classrooms run by Akanksha Foundation. In those classrooms, I could see teachers really helping uh, students ask the deeper questions about who they are, what gives them meaning, explore even at an early age these versions of the five sources of meaning that I touched on. I think that's what educational institutions need to do, systems need to do to unleash the full power of students and people in the world, Sandeep.
Yeah, I love those. I love those five sources, right? And I love the fact that as we think about them, we're all talking a lot these days across the world about stuff like well-being and balance and are people burning out, right? And there's a lot of research emerging that says that actually burnout and balance goes down, not yes when people are taking care of themselves, but also when people have purpose, right? And the absence of purpose, like just basically it perpetuates the feeling of being on the treadmill. So I really love those five sources. I've got one final question, and we're going to bring the audience into this, and I'm going to open this up, right? But one more question from my side. And you've done a lot of work on agility, and McKinsey's done a lot of work on agility, right? And like I know it's been like a topic that you have been exploring a lot. We saw there's this great article floating around that's highly provocative by the director of engineering for Google, where he argues basically somewhat mathematically that the rate of change across the world right now is the fastest that we have ever seen it, right? So it's not just a qualitative feeling, like quantitatively, the rate of change actually, when you take into account technology as well as ideas, is moving at the rate of almost 1,000 times as fast as it was 200 years ago, right? And I guess like when you think about what you've been working on with agility and what McKinsey's been working on with agility, like what does that mean? And how do we prepare adults for that? And how do we prepare workforces for that? That's my final question. And then we'll open this up.
Thank you, Sandeep. And I touched on it right at the beginning, right, when I talked about the trends in the world. Volatility is one of the biggest factors. So I think both the speed of change and the uncertainty in the world has just gone up dramatically, Sandeep. And I think what firms need to do is think about both what can create stability in the organizations that they're trying to set up, and stability in terms of infrastructure, stability in terms of direction, stability in terms of values and culture in the institution is actually really important to be able to deal with this change in the world. And the more clarity firms have on some of these questions around direction, around values, around what matters to them, their own identity, what they do really, really well, the more I feel they will be able to navigate this world of agility. At the same time, they need to have constructs where they can have small groups of people go do things at a much, much faster pace. We call them SWAT teams, which can then take on tough problems. And in the McKinsey context itself, when we're serving a client, we bring the full power of all the research and all the knowledge and our values and what we do, while at the same time empowering our team that is serving a client, whether it's a private sector, public sector, social sector client, to then feel fully empowered and feel that they have the power, they have the capabilities to be able to do what they need to do to deliver impact at the coalface with the client. So firms that are able to navigate this agile environment are able to get that balance of both the stable infrastructure, the stable backbone, the stable values, stable direction, with that flexible team, dynamic, really empowered team that can go do what it needs to do to deliver the purpose and mission of that firm. You see that whether it's a Navy SEAL team trying to do what they need to do, or a organizations like Spotify or others that practice these agile principles. That's what we see in these organizations. So therefore, I think for individuals need to think about the same two dimensions: what gives them purpose, their own values, how that fits with an institution. That then provides them the stability that then prevents them from getting caught up when they're dealing with volatility, and yet be adaptable, shift what they need to do, and move at speed when needed. Sandeep.
Totally. All right, folks, we're gonna pause, right? And for the educators and everybody else on this call, we're gonna steer this soon into okay, so if this is the future of work, then what are the implications for the future of schools, right? Which is where we eventually want to land in a few minutes. But before we do, I just love to open this up. Come on over to the chat box. If you want to come off of mute, come off of mute. But I'd love just to hear from the audience. We have about 25 people with us today. We have many more on YouTube, but for the folks that are with us, and if you're on YouTube as well, share there in the comment box as well, please, if you're streaming. So we'd love to hear from you. What is most sitting with you when you hear this right now? What's the top of mind reflection? What's the biggest reflection, the biggest thought, the biggest question that is sitting with you as you hear all of this, right? We've heard a lot of nuggets of wisdom about where the workforce is heading right now. And so when you think about this, what is most sitting with you? Would love to hear from folks in the audience. Come on over to the chat box. If you want to come off of mute, come off of mute. But my big request would be can we hear from everybody here, right? What is most sitting with you? A thought, a question, a reflection. So we'll let this sit for 2 or 3 minutes. Let folks either come on over to the chat box or off of mute, but please do one of those.
There's a question from the live streaming.
Great. Can you read it out?
Yes. So the question is from Shivika Chaudhary. She says, do you see the schools can change unless the approach to selection to higher education can change, and thus the way of workplace employee selection? So it's an interesting trickle-down question.
It's a great question. I do see shifts happening in the way employers are beginning to look at people, right? Where you see a lot more of skills-based hiring, whether it's the leading tech companies or others in the world, and they're emphasizing some of the skills that I touched on earlier, whether it's being technologically relevant or even placing greater and greater emphasis on socio-emotional skills. So that trend is definitely on and is happening. I do think higher education institutions are also changing the way they're hiring. They're beginning to think much more consciously about diversity, equity, inclusion. How do they think about hiring? I see the practices again. There are still some systems where which still don't have a multidimensional view of getting people into higher education, but you see a whole range, and you see enough people experimenting and pioneering new models. So I think it gives schools an opportunity. I'm sure there are some schools which are going to be pioneering these models. There are some schools which probably will be, fast followers and, staying in step with how things are changing. And then there may be some other schools who may, follow more of a wait and watch approach to see how the world really evolves before they take the plunge. So I can see a variety of approaches and how schools are responding to what's happening in the in the world of employment and in the world of higher education.
Thank you for that, Ramesh, and thank you for that question, Shivika. Let's hear from others over in the chat box. Thank you, Shruti. We're going to give it a little bit of time, actually, before we answer another one, just to let folks come on over to the chat box or come off of mute, right? But would love to hear what's emerging, one reflection that is sitting with you right now, or one question. If it's not a question, even just a reflection, an aha, a thought that's sitting with you.
Actually, I have a thought. It's not as much as a question after the conversation. You know, in schools, we always try to put this thing on the learners that everyone should imbibe the individuality, the uniqueness and everything. The more we get into the structure of work and everything, and it's a term that everybody uses, we're in this rat race and you have to just let go. You're so bracketed in everything. So whereas we're trying to bring about everyone's uniqueness and potential in some aspect, but when you go into the real world, it's actually taking away from you and there's no fulfillment. So how do you fill this gap?
Yeah, excellent question, Kriti. Yeah, excellent question. Ramesh, you have any thoughts there? Anybody else has any thoughts there? Let's open this up. You know, that's a very big question.
Sorry,
It is
can
a
I
big
just
question.
add on
Please,
to that?
Please,
Sorry,
please.
Ramesh. Hi,
Go for it.
Anita this side. The question that Kriti asked around individuality, I actually had a question around just the importance that local context or contextualizing what we are doing also holds in our education system. We've seen nationalized or generalized things taking precedence, but how do we still maintain that understanding and grounding in sort of the local context that our children should be knowing?
No, it's a great point you make, Anaga, and I touched on it very briefly with just one phrase. But I think when we've been doing our research on education systems in the world, and like the systems that are delivering the best outcomes in the world, whether it's states in the U.S., Tennessee, Louisiana, but also around the world, whether it's in countries like Finland, but also in other countries around the world. I saw the latest report, some of the outcomes in Punjab and Haryana, the improvement in Haryana. I feel like understanding local context and tailoring what happens in a school to the needs of local context is actually so important, and I think that's well understood. I feel, Anaga. So I think systems that are delivering great performance are doing that quite well. Kriti, on your question on the role of the individual versus role of society and the collective, that's a big one. Like I think it definitely, and in part, when I was talking about the sources of meaning and what gives purpose, I actually think this is something that we as a society will continue to explore more deeply. Different people are going to be thinking about this, and our own learning is still evolving in this. And it's, I think, as school systems, it's a great opportunity to explore further and help understand and experiment as we move forward, Kriti.
Sandeep, I just wanted to come in and ask a question and also share. So, Ramesh, what you shared was really powerful around, like, what is your purpose? What is it that you value? What are the structures that you can rely on, which will ground you? And at the same time, what prepares you for that fast change, right? But at the same time, we also talk about the need of flexibility that people are looking forward to or want in their lives and jobs. Can you give us some examples of what kind of structures do you see people value? And like, I personally resonate this with a lot. I have a young kid, and I've actually used his routine to fall into a proper structure and not use that as a very binding thing, right? But have used it to my advantage. So I do see the value, but if you can help us understand with some examples, what could it look like in the workforce?
Great question, Neha. And I think we, as McKinsey, have published a lot on, what are people learning from the whole post-COVID remote work experiments and what kind of hybrid models work, and also the the kinds of routines and structures that can be useful for people. I don't think, Neha, people have cracked the code, and you see even within an industry, some firms deciding to have bring workforce together, being in person because they feel it's critical to driving innovation and belonging. And then other companies in the same industry feeling like they can get a greater level of productivity and give the flexibility to individual employees to be able to maintain their own routines. So I think at least where what we see critical is a deeper understanding of what individuals need. Back to what you were describing, there may be individuals who are taking care of kids and therefore need to be at home and need to have some time off and need to do things at specific times that are important for them. So having an understanding of that and giving people freedom to be able to pursue that while recognizing that in order for creativity to come out and for people to have a greater sense of belonging, you do need that personal connection. So creating experiences which can be more meaningful for people, where people can come together, learn about each other, connect more deeply, having a more meaningful experience, spending time on innovation is quite important, both for the institution and for the individual. So that's what we're observing, and we're continuing to publish based on experiments that we see people doing, Neha. But I don't think the world has cracked the code yet on what will be the future go forward model. I think it's still work in progress, is our view.
Ramesh, while we talked about technology and agility to make work more purposeful, meaningful, and get on with your work life, what about thousands and lakhs of people in India who have no job and are staring at a blank wall? In our schools, can we, through compassion, think of these people who just getting a square meal, a roof over their head is all they're seeking. They're not seeking purpose or anything, technology. And we've neglected all these people in talking about these other things. They are the ones which will help people who have a stable job, a stable income. So if our schools have to be different, can we also bring in compassion, care, and bring in thinking about these people? I don't know.
So fully with you, Anuwan. The importance of compassion, care, understanding, what people need. So, I cannot debate or argue with that. And I'm also fully with you. You understand better than me the millions of Indians, and the needs that they might have that our current schooling systems are not catering to. So I do think as you think about uh, the this segment of people and what they need, maybe to that, the power of technology. I still think technology can play a role even with these folks. Again, it's something that may need more exploration. What is the kind of technology that they need, even for access to education, but also for them to be productive members of society? It might not be the same advanced technologies, the same kind of devices that we often talk about. So I think we need to be much more thoughtful about what they need to be productive members of society. So completely agree with you. And I think I'm hoping that, as a society, we come up with models where we have a deeper understanding of the needs of everybody in the world and come up with models that can unleash the full potential of each and every individual. I know that's really my hope for the system.
Hi, I have a question. Sandeep, sorry, were you saying something?
Go for it, Rashmi. And then after that, I'd like to bring
Hi.
Shri into this. Go
Hi,
for it.
Ramesh. So I think there is a lot of research and there is a lot of data around what organizations need to do for people in terms of, you need to build purpose or you need to give flexibility. There's a lot of talk about what an org needs to do. What do you think are some of the things we also need to tell Gen Z, as they call it, to not fall into the trap of so-called FOMO or this recent 8 versus 18-hour debate? What are some things that they also need to be doing consistently well to stay relevant, to also find their own purpose, apart from the usual narrative of you need to be upbeat about your skills and you need to constantly upskill? So that's one thing that we constantly tell people. But yeah, does that make sense?
It does. It does. Actually. I firstly, when I interact with people from Gen Z, my first orientation is really to learn and understand from them. I feel like there's so much they have to teach us. I myself am mentoring a number of alumni from Akanksha, from Teach for India, from an organization called America Needs You in New York. And every time I spend some time with them, I walk away learning so much from them. I see the directness that they bring, their ability to communicate crisply, and frankly, their understanding of how the world is changing is something that I learned from a lot. So that's sort of the place of humility with which I come at your question. My advice to them, not that different from some of the themes that we have been talking about. I always ask them to reflect on what matters to them. Even as the world is changing, part of what helps deal with the volatility is just a deeper understanding of of my own purpose, what matters to me, what has changed in my life, what has impacted me, some of the things that I have gone through in my life. So my advice would be to invest more time in asking themselves what matters to them, what is their purpose, and how does that tie back into whatever institution that they're part of, and making sure they're able to express that along the 5 dimensions of meaning that I touched on at the beginning. 100% with you on the whole mastery concept and picking a skill and getting better and better. Dan Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, purpose in driving motivation in his book Drive. So I always encourage people to think about what skills, experiences, knowledge do they want to learn so that they can become really, really good at whatever they want to do in their life. And then the last thought, going back to, I touched on the concept of ikigai, but in all of these, how do they do this in a world that fits with a need in the world that they're trying to satisfy, and whatever level of economic sustainability they want to have in the world, so that they are able to be contributors to the global Indian economy. So that's at least some of the suggestions that I share with people that I'm mentoring, Rashmi.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Mansi, and then we're going to bring in Shruti into this. And then I know I'm going to try to start going to some of the stuff that we skipped in the speed of this conversation that happened very early on in the chat. Meher, I see you coming up, and so we'll come back to you in a second as well. But let's go from Mansi to Shruti, Meher, and then I think Nikunjana, yours in the chat box also got caught up. So we'll go in that order if that's okay.
Thanks, Sandeep, and thanks, Ramesh. This has been amazing. So I think one question it's a question or nudge. With the workforce that is evolving so much, what are we doing and what are we building within our schools today that's going to prepare our children for the future, right? And so my question is what, and maybe how can we build for these aspects in schools that are also scalable and sustainable, even where technology may not be completely accessible by our children. So just
big question, Mansi. I think I've touched on a few of these, right? As we think about instruction and what is needed in schools, I think there's some core skills, learning outcomes that are important that I think are well understood by systems in the world. So really doubling down on those and making sure the learning losses through COVID, kids can recover from that, come out of this even stronger. I think is obviously one key dimension. At the same time, really investing in social emotional skills, which I touched on. I know you all do some excellent work in this space as well, like creating a curriculum, doing things in bite-sized chunks that can then be scaled, having ways by which teachers and other people in the system can learn how to do this with the kids that they are supporting, so that this can get spread in the world. And then maybe the last thing I'll touch on is, we've been talking about the future of work skills, or getting kids to become technologically literate and making sure that the skills that they learn can create jobs for them, make them both find their own purpose and meaning, but also then contribute to the world in whatever way they can. Back to Anu's point earlier, if it's somebody in India who may need vocational skills and things that can help them to be productive and get a job, there may be somebody else who wants to become a coder and contribute to the global economy as India continues to emerge as a technological leader in the world. So whatever skills they might be and wherever they are in the society, helping them unleash their own purpose and their own potential. Those are at least some of the big themes that stand out for me, Mansi.
For that, Mansi. Shruti, you had a question earlier and you had a reflection. Could you actually come off of mute and give voice to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sandeep. Hi, Ramesh. I think it's been absolutely wonderful to hear your pearls of wisdom. I've made copious notes in my diary because I'm a little old school like that, but really wanted to know, when you speak about agility versus stability, what does it mean, especially for our schools and children, since they are juggling with the harsh realities of their low resource communities, where time itself is a massive resource that they struggle with, balancing schooling, balancing all the work they need to do to support their families, as well as keep up with a constantly changing world. And how does equity play a role in all of this then?
Wow, Shruti, big question. Honestly, this is why I know Sandeep and team have founded the circle, right? I think it's a question that needs more exploration. I don't think we've cracked the code on this question. Just borrowing from what I was describing, not from education, but broader experiences of firms across sectors. I would say schools need to think about their own vision, mission, their own values, what matters to them. A technology platform that they can see being robust, an infrastructure that is robust, a set of routines and rituals that are stable, that can help anchor the institution, while then experimenting with more and more creative mechanisms. I was in a classroom a couple of weeks ago where I saw teachers pull out kids who need special instructions in small groups, getting using devices, getting special instruction that can move the needle on what they're learning in specific subjects. Like, that's an experiment I can see that could be meaningful for a school. Also, teachers really meeting kids where they are, understanding the kids' personal needs. Back to the question earlier on the socioeconomic context of a child or a group of kids, and providing the right kind of support needed for them. I can see experimentation and after-school programs that are happening around the world, where again organizations coming into schools are pulling out kids to then provide nutritious food and games and learning instruction that can help kids with mentorship support that kids might need, where an institution can tailor, experiment, be adaptable in what they're providing to a kid or a group of kids, to then really unleash the full potential in the child. That's what I feel is needed. But I'm using really examples. I think there's definitely a need for experimentation and innovation in this space in the future, Shruti.
We're going to take two more folks and then we're going to pause for just a little bit. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that there's a lot of questions that have emerged. And so the team has been messaging me and Archie has been messaging. There's a lot of the questions coming up on YouTube, and we may have more than we have time for, but we're going to start with Meher and then Nikunj, and then we're going to see if we have time for one or two more. And then we're going to
Sandeep, if somebody else wants to ask, please let them go ahead, because I can always ask Ramesh offline. So please go ahead with somebody else.
Okay. Nikunj, would you like to come and ask yours?
Actually, in the car, so I've put the message there, so it's going to be tough. Can you read out, please? Yeah, thanks. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Nikunj basically says a large part of our future workforce will be educated in government schools. And while initiatives like the Circle will help private schools, what can we do to get government schools ready to embrace these changes that are needed? Yeah.
Great question, Nikunj. I said I am long India, and I see I had a chance to spend some time with folks from the Dell Foundation earlier this week, as well as many other organizations who are doing work in states like Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Himachal, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Nagaland, Andhra Pradesh. All these states are doing some incredible experiments and work, Nikunj, and they're all learning from the best in India, but also the best in the world. It's great to see the exploration in instruction, in teacher training, in infrastructure, in the application of technology, in the application of socio-emotional learning, in the introduction of entrepreneurship. All of these, there are examples from each of the states that I just touched on, where there's work happening in the public schools. And I think what can happen from the work that is done by organizations that get involved in the Circle is hopefully the experiments, the innovation can be spread to these. Not every idea that where some innovation happens will get spread at scale to a system, but I think these experiments, these innovations, who knows? One of the entrepreneurs from Circle may actually go scale it up in a particular state or go lead education transformation in a state. But also, I'm quite optimistic that the transformations happening in these states will learn from the experiments, and the more we share ideas from these innovations, I think the more it will help the system at large, Nikunj.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Folks, I'm going to pause this here actually for a second, and I'd love to come back over to the audience, and I'd love just to pose a question, and that's that, we've been talking about this for the better part of an hour now, right? We've been talking about how is the workforce evolving? What are the implications for the future of India? What are the implications for schools? And we've been hearing a lot from Ramesh, and I'd love to hear from folks here now, when you think about what it means to hold all of this, right? We've talked about things like agility, like the need for 21st century skills, like compassion. We've talked about automation. When you think about all of this and the rate of change that underlies that, what does this mean for schools? And when you think about what's top of mind for you, if you had to say, because of this, actually, here's how I think schools need to evolve. What comes to mind? And I'd love to hear from our audience here. Come on back over to the chat box. How do schools need to evolve to be able to keep up with this? Would love to get some responses from the audience. We're going to spend the next 2 or 3 minutes just hearing from folks in the audience. People want to come off of mute, great. If not, come on over to the chat box. But when you hear about all that Ramesh has been sharing and we've been talking about for the past hour, how do schools need to evolve? And so if you could maybe identify the top 1 or 2 evolutions to make this really concrete that schools need to evolve and lean into, what would those be?
Hi, my name is Devana. Can I come off mute and talk?
Please, of course.
So I think I was a 2020 TFI fellow, and I was working in a government school, and I come from a private school where teachers there who provide you good knowledge, enough knowledge, but are still 40 years or 45 years or 50 years old, who've been working since then, been a teacher since 20 years, and they are not equipped enough with using the technology. And that is something that we saw enough during the 2020 and 2021 teaching at home. And I don't think teachers, even in the private school or any school as such, are equipped enough to teach and introduce the students socio-emotional learning, so which we've been talking about since the beginning. So I think that our role as educators or as a country has to shift also there to how we are making teachers equipped, and that is how the next generation could evolve.
Totally. Thanks for that, Devana. And DM in the chat box builds on that thought, right? You said basically teachers need to evolve in the chat box. DM is coming over and saying, actually, it's about attracting and retaining the best talent so that schools become more aspirational for people to work at. And there's so much power in that, in both of those. How do we evolve the workforce? How do we retain and attract the best talent into schools? Let's hear from a couple of more. Like, how do schools need to evolve? What are the big evolutions? Thank you for this, Shruti. We've got like, schools need to be a place of hope, where individuality is respected, right? And where, yeah, we're unleashing potential. Love to hear from some more. Like, how do schools need to evolve to be able to lean in to a lot of what we just heard right now?
I just feel schools need to evolve also in the sense that firstly, it has to be some sort of a learner-centric approach. Right now, schools are really hierarchy-based, right? Students also try to answer questions which they think the teacher wants to hear. So there has to be a learner-centric approach. And secondly, I just feel so many stakeholders are there, from their families to the community. So school is one part of the unit of learning, but everything has to come together collectively. So school has to become like a collective where a community can also sustain.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kriti.
I also feel like schools need to evolve from looking beyond the academic approach and more from a holistic evolution of a child, which then takes care of things just beyond your basic English, math, but how are you helping a child evolve beyond that as well? And another one is, I think, how are you bringing in student voices into a child's education journey? And that's what schools need to take in as well.
Yeah. It's Mansi. Let's hear from one or two more. Yeah, central learning around key values valued across life, work, and community. Yep. So I love this.
Sandeep, I'd like to share an idea from my wife, Charuta. As you know, Charuta is a teacher in a public school in Harlem, was a teacher until recently. She taught for 12 years. She often says when schools think about the math curriculum, they need to be thinking as much about problem solving, curiosity, so that kids are being prepared to solve the future problems of the world. And not just solving a numerical math problem, but use math curriculum as a way to help kids learn about problem solving. And the same thing with the reading curriculum, so that it's not just a literacy curriculum, but the curriculum is helping kids listen, helping kids communicate with each other, communicate with compassion, and become citizens of the world in the future. So there's something that I hope schools can think about more and more, so they evolve from just literacy and numeracy to really compassion, communication, listening, citizenship, and problem solving, curiosity, and being able to hold multiple perspectives from me.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for that, Ramesh. I'm going to build off of this piece that Aisha put in. If she's amplifying it or if she's sharing it, but this piece that Aisha's put in the chat box around like just growth oriented learning, right? And I think it ties into like what she mentions here is that we don't stop anymore. We don't pause in the workforce anymore from learning, right? We're just frequently learning all the time. And you mentioned this at the beginning, Ramesh, which is like, how do we actually start to build lifelong learners, right? There's a growing body of experiments and research emerging now that's starting to argue that actually like the infrastructure that supports learning right now is a bit outdated, because the infrastructure that supports learning is one that says you go to school for a certain amount of time of the day, you learn a little bit, and then you stop. And then you transition to a different type of school, you learn a little bit, then you stop. And there is a conversation growing now, which is, if you could reinvent the infrastructure itself, what would it mean to build an infrastructure that actually just supports lifelong learning? And what would it mean to build a new infrastructure that actually supports people to be able to reinvest in skills and reinvest in learning capacity over and over again, so that they actually lean into this possibility of frequent reinvention? Would love to hear how you respond to that, Ramesh, and what that makes you think of.
I think that's a very powerful idea, Sandeep. I think given the volatility in the world and all the things we talked about on the rate of change, this concept that one can learn, go to school for a period of time, go to college for a short period of time, and then be productive members of society for 50 years, I think that is just like more and more hard to imagine. So I can see, and the higher education institutions are beginning to do more and more of that, but I can see schools also, having to do that in the future, where people keep coming back and schools becoming mechanisms for lifelong learning, where the school actually helps a student early on understand how to be a learner and how to be able to access resources in the world. And then, they say if you want to help somebody become a great sailor, it's less important almost to give all the tools and techniques for constructing a boat and like the compass and direction, but really give them a joy for the sea. And so I feel the equivalent is, schools need to help kids have a joy for learning, help them become independent, help them access whatever resources they need, put in place mechanisms for lifelong learning, and then create the infrastructure mechanisms digitally, other ways where people can keep coming back so that they can learn through their lives. Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, folks. We are going to try to bring this to a close in the next 1 or 2 minutes here. And as we do so, a big thank you, Ramesh. I think like it's been a fascinating and also just invigorating 70 minutes. Like a lot of great like thoughts shared, a lot of like pieces to think about, a lot of provocations shared. And to the rest of you who actually came on to be able to hold space, and join us today, a big thank you to all of you. I know it is the end of a day and the end of a week. And so we appreciate you just joining us this evening. We're gonna pause at this. We're gonna close. We're gonna continue to hold these discussions over the next couple of months and going forward. So please do join us, folks. Every 2 weeks, you'll be hearing us, engaging with different workshops, different leaders from across industries, right? And our goal is to not just say, let's take this, what does the future of schools look like, just from an inside out perspective. We're not just going to be engaging with one type of person. Our goal is to expand the conversation with as many types of people as we possibly can. So please do join us. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great weekend, everybody, and have a great rest of your evening. We will talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a good one.